Hello everyone, welcome back. Today in this part we will be discussing about nonmetals, what is a nonmetal and its physical properties also. So what is a nonmetal? In simple definition we could say that those material which do not possess the characteristics of metals are termed as nonmetals, or simply we can say that it is just the opposite of metals. That is, its definition, its properties are exactly the opposite of that of what we saw in last part about metals. Examples. Example would be coal, sulfur, oxygen, carbon, etc. There are many more examples. So now let us see the physical properties of nonmetals. So what are the physical properties of nonmetals? As I said earlier, it is exactly opposite of that of metals. So when you compare it and learn, it will be very easy for you to understand and also apply them in your exams. So just compare it and learn every time you learn the difference between the physical properties. Let us see. The very first property is non-malleable. So that is the very first property. So what is non-malleable? Nonmetals are generally brittle, non-malleable, or they are also known as brittle, and hence it cannot be beaten into thin sheets or drawn into wires. So in other words, we can say that nonmetals are brittle, and when the stress is applied, it breaks easily. Take an example. For example, this is a coal. So when you apply a stress, what happens is that it has very low tensile strength, so it just break into two pieces, or when it is hammered, it just break into powdery mass. So that is the very first property. Examples you could say about sulfur. It's a very good example. And coal, yet another very good example which we can see itself, which we use for many purposes. So these are main examples, and also phosphorus is also an example. Second one is non-ductile. So nonmetals are non-ductile because they cannot be melted or drawn into thin wires. So they are brittle in nature. Both of these non-malleable and non-ductile are almost similar property because both of these cases they are brittle objects. Examples are also same as that of the non-malleable property, that is sulfur, phosphorus, coal, etc. So both of those are almost similar. Third one is poor conductors of heat and electricity. Or in one word we could say that these are simply insulators. Example would be plastic. It's very simple example because plastic, we know that it won't conduct heat or electricity. While heated, it just melts, and it is a non-conductor of electricity. So generally nonmetals are poor conductors or bad conductors of heat and electricity. So example is plastic. Another example would be carbon, or simply it is a graphite, which is mostly in pencil and all. So these are poor conductors of heat and electricity. Next property is non-sonorous. So you're familiar with the word sonorous, which means that it creates a ringing sound when struck with any object. In this case, it does not make any sound when it is hit with an object, so it is thus non-sonorous. Example is coal, phosphorus, etc. These just does not make any sound when it is struck with any other object. Another property is non-lustrous. As you can see that all these properties are exactly the opposite of that of the metal. So if you learn one pattern, then it is very easy to study the properties of non-metal, because it is just the opposite of that of the metals. So non-lustrous means, you know, the lustrous property is the shiny property which has for the metals. So in the case of non-metal, for take its example of a plastic, it is not that much shiny in when you see, just like gold or silver, it is not that shiny, so it is non-lustrous. Or we could simply say that these are the dull objects, and they are non-lustrous and it does not have any shiny appearances. Sixth one is softness. Non-metals are generally soft because due to its non-ductile and non-malleable property, that is, when stress is applied, it just breaks into powdery mass or it cannot be drawn into wire. So these non-metals are generally not so strong. Although there is some exception in this case, that is, diamond is an exception in this case. So diamond is a very hard, it is generally known as a very hard object, and it is the hardest natural substance known. This is just the exception, and all other non-metals are very soft in nature. Next property is existence in room temperature. So what form it exists in room temperature? These non-metal, it exists in solid, liquid, and also gaseous state. That is, non-metals exist in all these three cases. Example would be in solid, it is carbon and sulfur. Both of these are in solid state. In case of liquid, it is bromine, which is liquid in the room temperature. Gaseous, very simple example, that is oxygen and nitrogen. It is very simple example. So these three stages exist in room temperature. Next property is low melting and boiling point. So non-metals have very low melting and boiling point since its particles are loosely packed. So therefore it just requires very little heat to melt them or boil them. So non-metal possess low melting and boiling point. So here we have an exception, that is graphite is an exception, because carbon or graphite is a non-metal that possess high melting point, whereas all other non-metals have very low melting point. Then the last property is low tensile strength. Non-metals cannot bear strain, thus they have low tensile strength. They are not so strong and it get easily broken, as I said earlier. For example, coal. These get easily broken down when stress is applied to it. So it has low tensile strength. So by this we conclude the physical properties of nonmetals, and in the next part we will discuss the chemical properties of metals and nonmetals. Keep watching.